call this meeting to order.
Yeah, only one item on the agenda, right? So.
Yeah, it's just, we're gonna talk about the budget changes. And I think, Tony, you wanted to make some comments,
Yep.
and then Jonathan's gonna make some comments. And then I think my objective, and I'm sure everyone's got some things they wanna add, is just to, offer some guidelines for. Oh. Just to offer, just to offer some guidelines for the administration and team to put together some ideas for us to consider. Because I think this is a work in progress. We have a little bit of time, but not as much time as people think, which Tony, you can comment on. But does that sound good to everybody?
Fine.
Cool. Tony, over to you.
The first item I wanted us to start with today was just making sure we all have the accurate number, because there's been so much information that's been floating around. So Ben Branian is just going to walk us through, and he's got it on a sheet so that you can see the numbers.
Good evening, all. The sheet in front of you, just to level set everyone, I'll be referring to the line items, which is on the line 1 through 9, which is on the left-hand side. Very
Ben,
quick.
Ben, could you zoom in at all? Is that possible?
I'll let Mike. Mike's handling that, so I'll make sure. Give him a
Okay.
moment.
There we go. That's better. Thank
Better?
you.
All right. So line 1 is fiscal year 25. It's the fiscal year that we're currently in. Line 2 is the superintendent's budget that was presented in November of last calendar year, which was a $10.3 million increase, or 5.35%. The Board of Ed, as you know, made a $500,000 reduction, which is line item 3. And line item 4 is what was presented to the BET and the Office of the First Selectman for their consideration, which was a $9.8 million increase, or 5.09. After the BET's decision day last week, they made an adjustment of the $4,048,621, which brings you down to the budget that BET will be presenting to the RTM, which is a $5.7 million increase, or a 2.99% increase. What we want to be able to just put on the table is line items 7 and 8. We're calling those the known knowns. We know that we have an issue of the BET transferred funds from the Board of Ed to the town of Greenwich. So the fiscal year we're sitting in, we had 50% of the salaries for 3 positions budgeted, and the town had the other half budgeted. When we built the budget in November, the assumption was those positions would be moving over to town hall. So we did not include those in the budget that both the superintendent and the Board of Ed approved. Subsequently, the town did not approve did not include it in their budget either. During the budget deliberations we had with the BET in February, we said we had this known problem of the 334,000, almost 335,000 of 3 positions that are critical for the operations of the district and the town. However, they have no budgetary home, so we need to add those back in to the budget. And also, as we look at the enrollment numbers, we have a high degree of certainty that line item 8 for the fall of September of 25, we know we're going to be adding the 18th classroom. So I think it makes sense, again, to make sure if we know knowns, we add that, which includes the teacher and the 2.4 paras. So you add those 2 additional numbers, the total adjustment that we're proposing we need to find is the 4.587962, which is line item 9.
Ben, can you just offer the predictability around the pre-K, just so people understand what drives that and why it evolves over time?
I'm going to kick that over to Dr. Jones. She can speak much more eloquently to that than I can.
Preschool is required by federal law, and that's why we have it. We don't have universal pre-K in Connecticut. So what it means is it's just children that are qualifying for services. And these are children that live in our local community. They're out sometimes in community pre-Ks. They realize they may have been in birth to 3, so they're actually even identified, when they're the first week of their life. And then they qualify. And when the children qualify, we must provide those services. And so that's when we add a pre-K. It's on need.
And just that it's fair to say that that's something that it's not something we go out and seek. We get reported numbers and we got updated numbers and we're just updating the budget accordingly for the updated numbers, right?
That's correct. It's called Child Find, and it is usually, if they're in community pre-Ks, they're usually making a recommendation to us, a referral. And these are children that, they go through an assessment process. Some qualify, some don't. And so if they don't qualify, they stay wherever they are now. If they do qualify, sometimes they'll still stay where they are, but usually they will choose to be in Greenwich Public Schools because it's a special needs program that understands how to work with children who have these special needs.
And Tony, the qualification of pre-K is pretty cut and dry. It's not subjective. It's a quantifiable. It's all based on testing, test scores.
Absolutely.
Right.
So and this will be posted for those of you that are taking copious notes. We'll make sure we post this for you tomorrow. The next thing that I've asked, I'm sorry.
Just before we go, Ben, what are the three FTEs that on the town side that aren't funded?
It was
Number 7.
It was our line item 7 was the director of purchasing for the Board of Ed, and 2 of our time and attendance personnel or compensation, or essentially the payroll department that processes all the time and attendance for the Board of Ed. Last year, so for fiscal year 25, the BET during decision day made a motion to fund 50%. Effective January 1 of 2025, they were going to move the staff over to town hall. And so when we built the budget that's in front of you in November, our assumption was that that plan was going to happen. So we did not include them in our operating budget for fiscal year 26. Between then and now, it's changed where the town did not want to include that. It really wasn't going to work. And so we ultimately, both sides, the Board of Ed and the town, did not include them in the budget. And we need to find a budgetary home for them.
Thanks.
I think the point there is just what the BET was working with wasn't this. So there's always an intellectual argument that if these came about a little later, we'd go and ask for an interim funding request. But by the way that the BET, what they put forward, it just means that instead of a change to the budget of 4 million, it's a change of 4.58 million. Ben, can you also comment on one other thing, just because there's a lot of numbers being thrown around, and I think it's helpful to point out the BET and BOE look at slightly different numbers because of what goes in the BOEs, the way we tabulate it, and then what gets actually the total cost to the town. Can you just comment on that too, just to help? I think this is a meeting that some people are watching, so just for the entertainment factor, could you help just tie out the numbers that the BET often cites with the numbers that are here?
The numbers in front of you are for the general fund or the operating budget for the Board of Ed only. So this is what we receive to operate the district. At the same time, the town budgets for both the town operations and the Board of Ed operations, the fixed charges, or sometimes we just refer to them as the benefits. Those are all of the defined benefit, defined contribution costs for the non-certified staff, medical, payroll tax, all of those items, workers' comp, that's the fixed charges. The town has an allocation method where they will then allocate those budgetary expenses that are accounted for to the Board of Ed. So when you see a number, I think the number that I saw was around 247 million. That would be the difference between, I believe it would be the difference between line item 4, which is what we originally was presented and discussed in the public was a 202. When you hear the 247, they're doing an all-in number of operating plus fixed charges. But for what the Board of Ed has to make a decision on is the numbers in front of you, which are the operating budget. But when you hear the other numbers, they're adding in fixed charges.
Thanks. And
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm happy you brought that up. I don't appreciate how that's sort of been thrown about at this time, because when we were issued our BET guidelines, they were with very specific numbers. I feel like that's a matter of convenience that certain members of the BET are now using those numbers, which are an allocation. And so I'd rather not get into that this evening, but I think Ben was saying clearly we're working with, we went with a budget that we worked a lot on as a group. I'll remind everyone the vote was 7-1 from the Board of Education, and it was 202 million that we put forth. We are now looking at trying to fill a $4.6 million hole, which none of us want. And I am really frustrated, honestly, about this, because I feel like, and I'm going to be very clear, 6 Republicans made this decision for 60,000 people. And we now are going to talk about a lot of things tonight, none of which I'm going to endorse, but we have to make some serious decisions, of which I'm going to have to vote on.
Tony. Yeah, unless, or Laura, do you want to say something?
Well, I mean, this is the saddest exercise I've ever had to engage in. So I guess my question is, if we're starting to look at programming, obviously we want to look at areas that don't impact the classroom, because that's sort of we really want to preserve, to the extent we can, the classroom experience for all of our students. And, you know, I sort of have to ask, you know, there are no, I've looked at this budget book. I have all my notes. One of the only discretionary programs we have is ALP. And if we were to eliminate ALP in the 2nd grade, but keep it for the other grades, would that be a material? Because in our budget books, it's broken out by school, but not by grade. So.
Well, maybe just a before getting into the line item stuff, I think from an agenda standpoint, we're thinking Tony wanted to have Jonathan make some comments as it relates to the contract and how some of the contract dynamics work, and say a little bit high level, and then we can move into the zone of
The sad exercise.
yeah, I mean, you're editorializing. But do you want to intro Jonathan?
So, you know, obviously, when we're talking about a budget reduction of this amount, you can't do it without impacting people and programs. That's the bottom line. And I haven't changed my stance on that from what I have said publicly. And I think it's really important that a lot of people who make decisions come from the business world, not from the school world. And the way that you can go in and reduce positions, for instance, in a business, if you want to fire 10 people, you can go fire 10 people. We are very much a negotiated, we're a contract state. And so all of our positions are part of a bargaining unit. And I want Jonathan just to talk about some of the complexities when we get into really talking about positions. So Jonathan, let me turn it over to you.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Dr. Jones has asked me to speak this evening on just what might be a few relevant principles in regard to personnel and the budget reconciliation process. First, the vast majority of our personnel belong to collective bargaining associations, unions, 3 of which are Greenwich Public Schools unions, and an additional 4 are unions through the town of Greenwich with employees who work for the Board of Education. And all of those people have various contractual rights, some of which govern the procedures by which the workforce can be reduced. So if decisions are made by the board to reduce the number of individuals employed in a particular employee group, then the relevant contractual language would govern the processes to be followed. In some cases of job reduction, more senior employees could have the right to bump into positions currently held by less senior employees. The various union contracts also contain provisions regarding transfer. These provisions could come into play if decisions are made by the board that would cause some individuals currently in one position to move into other positions. With certified staff, seniority and certification come into play. With non-instructional staff, such as, but not limited to, administrative assistants, custodians, and others, transfer language may have an impact into positions in those groups who work for the town. A Greenwich Public Schools non-instructional staff member with seniority rights may be able to move into a town position in the same union. In addition, there is a provision in the administrative contract under Article 8 which addresses any reduction in force. A full-time administrator who gets bumped to a different position in year one is paid 80% of the difference between the salary received and the salary at the time the administrator was notified of displacement. And that goes on for 5 years from 80%, 55%, then 30%, 10% in year 4, and then ceases in year 5. So, for example, if an individual moved from a $175,000 administrative job to a $125,000 teacher position, the district would pay 80% of the difference in salary next year. So what might be thought of as a $50,000 difference would cost the district $40,000. So savings are not as easily captured as one might think. And in addition, if the person we're talking about bumps another administrator on a different salary lane, we could have several people impacted, kind of like a domino effect. Now, I just have a couple more comments, but actually what I've described so far are some aspects of our staff's contractual rights. Beyond that, the employment of our certified staff. Now, that includes our teachers, our administrators, and most members of the cabinet. That employment's also governed by statutory provisions of Connecticut's teacher tenure law. And those provisions could come into play if there's any potential for the dismissal of individuals in any of those groups. So as an example, if the board's decisions were to cause the end of employment in GPS for a tenured teacher, administrator, or cabinet member, that individual may have the right to bump into the position of another individual, even in a situation area different from the one utilized currently by the individual. So for example, a tenured cabinet member or administrator would have a right to another tenured job within GPS, potentially within the teacher unit. So as speaking for the superintendent, Mr. Branyan, and myself, this is why it takes time for this process and why we can't make decisions in one meeting and provide precise calculation of the savings. We have to know first which employees would be impacted. Then we would work with the finance personnel to calculate the actual savings. We might have a reduction in force of a $75,000 less senior teacher, but be adding a $133,000 teacher who has moved from the administration work group to become a teacher, and then pay the 80% differential. So at any rate, please know that if decisions are made by the board that affect the details of employees' work, the superintendent and I will work with the necessary parties involved, including the finance personnel, as quickly as possible, as we must issue contracts and salary agreements for next year. We certainly don't want people to panic and leave because they're not feeling confident about their positions, which is why we will implement what you ask us to in a precise and sensitive way. Thank you.
Jonathan, it's a fine point. Is it 80% of the difference between the two salary lines, or is it 80% of the salary?
Difference.
First original salary. It's the difference. 80% is the difference. Okay.
I wanted to, as a follow-up to that, Tony, if you don't mind if I put you on the spot for a moment, I think a from when you look at the surface budget numbers, it's very interesting because you go, oh, someone like me looks and says, the budget grows every year and or the spending grows every year and there's always this talk about cuts and all this stuff, but it's like, hey, spending's growing every year. Why does it feel like there's always so much pressure on programs or some things? And I think there's some unique aspects to Connecticut that I thought would be interesting to hear your perspective on, having worked in a lot of other districts. I think it's useful for people to understand the constraints that are unique to this state, and then therefore the district.
Sure. I think, we are a bargaining state and we have to recognize that. And the largest driver that we have when we build the budget every year is our salary line. And so we don't really control that a great deal other than during the bargaining process, of which you can go to arbitration. And I think people that are in the community that are elected officials understand how it works. But if people don't really like that salaries are growing that fast, then you need to take it up with Hartford, because that's a legislative action. We are doing what we are required to do by law, and it is very different than when you're in a state that's a non-bargaining state. For instance, when I was in Virginia, they have a teachers union, but it's not unionized to the same rules that you have in Connecticut, which are very tightly regulated. So when I was building the budget, if we were having a difficult year in that state, you could set the increase of whatever you wanted, from 0 to whatever the board wanted to do to stay competitive in the region, whatever you want to do each year. We cannot do that. We have these contracts. They are legal and they are binding, and that's what drives our budget.
Thank you. It reminds, I was in Spain this morning and yesterday, and I was talking to someone there, and I said, "Oh, what's the best job to get when you graduate college?" And they said, "Oh, working in the government, because that job becomes your property. You can never lose it." And we're not quite there yet with the unions in Connecticut, but we're on our way. Anyways, I think for next, of just the way to do this, guidelines for you all in terms of what to focus on from us, and then any individual items that we want to raise, which Laura, I know you started doing. I think if we wanted as a committee to go through and just bring up ideas, I think and I wouldn't, just for people listening, this is not the moment where we go, oh, this program, and this person are all being cut or something like that, because there's actually a lot of work. And to Jonathan's point, it's actually much more difficult to figure out what the impacts are. I can say in a moment what Marshall will say now. My focus is to offer enough guidance such that in perhaps a 2-week or, slightly more than 2 weeks, because there's a vacation coming up, 2 to 3 week period, the administration can come back and say, here's I'd call it a menu of recommendations or potential actions that this committee and then the board can adopt in order to be in line with the BET's numbers. But in order for you to do that, I think you probably need guidance from us on what our priorities are, and then also ideas from us to the extent that people want to flag specific things that they're focused on. And then, since I think we have somewhat of an audience, if anyone else has any really good ideas, we're always open to hear them. I've taken a few calls this week, and you always learn something. So does anyone want to start with just proposing different things that they'd like specifically for Tony or Ben to look into? Laura, you already got us started. Do you want to take the?
Well, I mean, some of us have been staring at this book since the BET voted. So yeah, well, I mean, we've been, whatever, you know what I mean, taking another close look at this book. So but the thing that I raised about second grade ALP funding, because our expenses in our budget book are broken out by individual schools, it's not easy to tell what might be saved by just trimming ALP in the second grade, but leaving it as is in 3, 4, and 5. As I said before, it's our only discretionary program that we have. I mean, other than sports. God. So I wanted to ask that question and then ask if there are any consultants that we employ as a district that are a significant cost, because I think we want to preserve those teachers that are in front of our children and preserve the classroom experience to the degree that we can. So I'm, just thinking outside the box to ask that question.
So in terms of consultants, it is a line that I think a lot of people get confused on. We have one consultant, Dr. White, which our staff know very well, and he does tremendous work for us. He's not a super expensive line in the budget. What they're seeing are mainly consultants that are used in special education. If we need specialized assessments, for instance, for maybe a student who could be hearing impaired and we need somebody specialized to do the assessment, most of the consultants fall in that line in special ed.
I think it would be good to quantify, I guess, what that cost to the district is and whether we have anybody in our stable of employees or direct employees that could fill that role.
No, go ahead. Please.
Yeah, because you want me to fall on the sword in some way? No, thank you. No, because I mean, I'll stop making it political, but, although everything is, but, again, nothing I suggest tonight do I want to do. I'm going to keep going back to the fact that I really liked the budget we put together. In fact, the night I spoke and advocated for it in front of the BET, I said in the 8 years I've been on the board, I'm pretty sure I never had a 7-1 vote. So, to me, that said everything, and it should have delivered what we were hoping for. But nevertheless, here we are tonight. You're right, Cody, in the sense that we've had a lot of calls with lots of thoughts this week. I'm sure we've all been taking lots of phone calls, and there seems to be one thing that keeps rising to the top. I have to admit, I feel very conflicted about it. So I don't even love raising it, but it seems that GOSA and GEA seemingly are aligned on this one, and that is changing start time. And that actually happened before I was on the board. I actually remember Peter Scher was a big advocate for it. And at the time, it was, I think, like 1.2 million. And again, it was right before I came on the Board of Education that they made this decision. So I have to imagine it's grown significantly since then, just based on our busing contract. So I think we have to look at it. I think it's going to be something that we have to really talk about as a community, because it was a big community discussion at that time. But given how many people have suggested that, I feel like I have to say it.
Yeah, I think there's a few other smaller modifications to school bus contracts too that they're looking at. And I think the key thing here is it's I mean, we don't do that much because I think Tony and Ben are really good at this and are already on top of it, but we can say look, bus contracts or specific programs, and then they're in the process, and Patrick too, they're in the process of tabulating the numbers that we can gather again as a budget committee in 2 or 3 weeks, and then actually look at the menu. But yeah, I think the school bus one is one that's already underway. We won't let that, Peter we won't hold that against the program when we assess it. If you want to, yeah.
Yeah, because people might be confused.
So,
Why that's a budget savings?
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about, because first of all, let me talk about process. So when the guidelines come out and we're building the budget, after the budget passes, we're always paying attention if we are higher or lower, a higher amount than what the guidelines say. So we start working on things behind the scenes, because if this happens, now this is the worst case scenario since I've been here, but we start working on things just like generating ideas. This idea comes up every year. And so we ask our transportation coordinator to start working on this issue. She worked on it for well over a month for something that may never come to fruition. But we're talking about it tonight, and this is why we had her do it. And Ben, I think, is prepared. I checked with him this morning, and he can kind of share a little bit about the number and what it means in number of buses to change start time.
The exact time?
So the model we looked at, and I'll just go by the schools from the time. So the big adjustment's going to be the high school. That's your number one constraint when you take a look at your number of buses needed, at the sheer volume of students at that facility. That drives the number of buses you need. And if you can't run a 3-tier system, which allows you to do high school, middle school, and elementary, that creates inefficiency. So you have more buses because you have overlap of the time between the middle school, elementary, and high school. So if you can solve for the high school by moving them 60 minutes earlier, so they go from 8:30 to 7:30. The middle schools, you move them 5 minutes later, so they go from 8 o'clock to 8:05. And a couple of the, and then the Ham Ave, Julian Curtis, and New Leb, they move 15 minutes later. They're currently 8:15, so they would move to 8:30. Parkway is currently 8:45. They would move to 9. And the balance of all the elementary schools would move 10 minutes. They would move currently from 8:45 to 8:55. When we do that, we run through the number of buses and routes needed, you can have a reduction of 23 buses, which brings you, based on the budget we have built with the daily run rate, $2.5 million savings. So that's the quick and dirty of the adjustments to transportation schedule, $2.5 million budgetary savings by 23 less buses, because you've created a more efficient route for each bus that we would have then would be able to run 3 routes. Because you're paying the same cost for the bus regardless if they run 1 route or 2 or 3.
So in this scenario, the high school would start at 7:30 a.m.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, the community was very loud and in their advocacy years ago to move to a later start time for the teenagers who, needed sleep. But I think we've got to consider all our options, and I know that will complicate people's work schedules and childcare coordination, but it's something to put on the table.
And for me, just I think from a guidance standpoint, I think it's very important that what we end up with for the budget committee and then the board to consider is a list or a menu that is longer than what the total amount that we're solving for is, because the trade-offs associated with any of these choices are going to be the key decisions that are made. If we just have a specific set of items that add up exactly to the 4.6 or 4.1 or whatever, then it doesn't leave a lot of room for deliberation. Whereas what I think would be ideal, and this is sort of in the guidance, and hopefully everyone is on board with this. This is just me speaking for myself at the moment, that we can have a list of items and then debate the merits of it, such that we can say, okay, well, do we think that the potential impact on sleep or whatever as it relates to student outcomes and is worth it, or should we get these changes? Should we make changes elsewhere? So this is all about trade-offs. And when I think about the trade-offs, the question is trade-off relative to impact on student outcomes, but specifically the student outcomes that we're most focused on in our strategic goals and the metrics that we track to it. It's like the whole point of having a strategy and having things we focus on is that it can allow us to prioritize and evaluate trade-offs. So just for Ben, Patrick, Tony, my ask for the committee would be that we come up with more things than we will end up doing, so that we can evaluate where the correct marginal trade-off is, and actually be able to talk about things like the merits of a school bus change versus other potential changes that we could make.
Yeah, just the big picture. Yeah, I think that's really important for a couple of reasons. Like you're saying, um, we come up with a list that magically gets to 4.5 million. I don't think we're responding to the claim that there is fluff in the budget or areas that we can shrink in things. I mean, reducing start time is a big number, and obviously we have to look at it. That doesn't do anything to address any charges of that there's padding in the budget, right? That's changing the program to what I would argue is a suboptimal program for a lot of reasons. But all the more reason why I think we need a list. Similar to that, 2 points. I think there's been a lot of talk about substitute costs, admin costs, and the relationship between our current enrollment and costs compared to years past. And I know that there were the district put forth a lot of facts and things during the budget debate about that. But I think when we look at this list, I think we have to have we have to talk about that list in relation to those things as well. I know that there were things in the substitute costs in that line that have to do with a lot more than just a person calling out sick. Just like there's a lot in the consultant line that is not a consultant coming in to tell the administrators about great ideas. But it's a consultant giving a hearing examination. That's something that no one's going to do, no district employee is going to do for. I think breaking those things out as part of, as a second thing, I think is very important for our committee to look at, to make sure we can come back and say, here's what these cuts really mean. We've looked at all these other areas of concern, and this is a realistic assessment of what's in and isn't in the budget. While I have the mic, one other point, since we're not all doom and gloom, I do think I'm going to get an email about this from people, but I do think there might be a silver lining here in that it does provide opportunity. There was such a thing as, institutional inertia in schools and in districts and things like that. And there might be some areas, and this is for you, Tony, and your team to look at. There might be some areas of improvement, whether it's efficiency or other areas of improvement, where we know we've been wanting to do things better, and now we have a bad guy that we can point to. That might allow us to do that and affect change in a way that maybe we couldn't before. So I would challenge us when looking at this list to look at it from a couple of lenses. Absolutely, number one, like Laura said, what's not going to impact students and kids. But secondly, if there are areas where we might be able to use this to our advantage to affect some changes that we've wanted to make and it's been harder to affect, obviously this might be a chance to do that. For second grade ALP might be one of those reasons, in all honesty, but that's different. I'm not a fan, but okay.
I don't know. That's just like the funniest analogy came to my head, which maybe not everyone will appreciate besides someone that follows the markets. That was kind of like the silver lining of the Treasury Secretary tried to put out about the markets. Like the good news is that the infrastructure worked when everyone was losing billions. But I don't know if anyone else follows them. I'm sure Cody appreciates what I just said. But okay, well, you liked it. It was, the infrastructure worked while everyone was imploding.
Well,
The market was imploding. So I'm not finding many silver linings here,
I understand.
but I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of goes back to what I said at the very beginning. There's a lot of misinformation that has been put out, unfortunately, on the radio show, in the paper, in the public meeting, decision day. There were people saying we can cut $2 million from the sub budget. That's our entire sub budget. When we have a teacher who is not here, you cannot have 8-year-old children running around a classroom with no adult. It is not like being in an office. So I just want to clarify that because I don't need to wait another 2 weeks to do so.
I also, we're talking about, just for a second, 1% of the town budget. Okay, we're about to like, basically, people are going on vacation right now, worried about their jobs. And I mean, I actually have 3 kids in the public schools. I don't think many of the people that made this decision do. And kids are worried. So I don't take any of this lightly. And we know I don't usually speak like this. That's how, like, I mean, this is me being like fairly balanced. But this is a lot to be asking. And so I'm not sure I'm ready for, like I said it to you, like death by 1,000 cuts. I'm really, because I think we need to measure what we're about to do, right? And therefore, I think it can only really be a few things because we're going to have to see how bad it was, really.
I'm a little more, or sorry, go for it.
So anyone who follows the budget process year after year after year, as some of us have on the RTM and now the Board of Ed, you know, we've seen what this looks like before. We've stared this in the face during COVID when we were flat funded and we had no way to really do a full assessment because, you know, the schools were closed. We wound up getting lucky with our transportation contract, but we had to stare down, you know, the idea that we had no money for library books and professional development. And, you know, all of those things became, you know, painful to read in the paper. Greenwich doesn't have enough money for library books. Greenwich doesn't have enough money to invest in its teachers with professional development. And that wasn't even during COVID. That was when Ralph Mayo was our acting superintendent before Tony came to us. We had no money for professional development to invest in our teachers. We've had to make these horribly disappointing decisions over and over and over again. And this is by far the most depressing and egregious. But I mean, none of the options are attractive. And I think, you know, I don't look at this as an opportunity. I look at this as this is DEFCON 1 to have to find $4 million. So I mean, you know, some of us have been looking at the least awful scenario and those are the ones, you know, that we can still preserve the classroom with. You know, we could, I guess Greenwich doesn't have enough money for library books this year. Again.
Well, just on your point, Laura, I think if we get a list of things and we decide that library books are the thing that should go, but I think just to keep a sense of proportion about this, it is both true that we had a very, I thought, reasonable and thoughtful budget, and that Patrick, Ben, Tony, and team do a great job assembling this stuff and managing all of the ridiculous complexities that a public school system has to deal with as it relates to the unions and the laws and the cartel status of our counterparties. So they do a great job dealing with all that. Nonetheless, I probably take a slightly less apocalyptic view of the idea that 2% is 2%, and it's very heavily squeezed between two, you know, aggressive boulders and mandatory spending that we have related to special ed and mandatory spending that we have related to salaries. But I'm interested to see what I don't think we have the answers yet. The whole point of this is offer some guidance. I know it's feels a little different than our normal budget meetings that like 2 people attend, but where we can, you know, there's a little less theatrics, but it's have some guidance for the team who's very smart and capable and see what they come back with. And it'll be very interesting to see like what the ultimate things on the menu are. And then we can make calls. And it's very unlikely to me that we have, you know, all the dollars in the system impact students in some way, presumably, even in the very faintest way. So it really just comes down to a question of trade-offs. And when we're looking at it, we'll say, okay, maybe the impact isn't really quite worth it here. But I do think long-term structurally that there's a very big issue that if parents want to really, said this somewhere else, but the biggest problems are from Hartford. And so all the pitchforks and everything, if they want to do the longer drive and go there, that's probably the better place to focus long term. But we'll see what we can do. I'm a little optimistic that at least our team is good enough to come up with some interesting ideas like the school bus changes and other things.
You'll recall, we already gave Tony that job. We said, we want to reduce this budget. I mean, I didn't want to, that was someone else's idea, but to ask Dr. Jones to find 500,000 in savings, and it resulted in headcount reduction. So I don't know that I'm anxious to give another homework assignment to our administration who've poured it over and turned it over 1,000 times. I think we all have to sort of look this in the face and really solidify what this means for our families. I think this is a pretty big cut, and it didn't come from Hartford. It came from 6 people on the BET.
Look,
Well, just remember that we're growing spending depending the fully loaded amount of costs in the system, we're growing spending 3%. So it's where's that money going? Right? Like we say cut, 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 cut. We are spending more money in fiscal year 25 than we did in the year before. Like that's very
Well, some of the people that crunch the numbers, who fancy themselves as experts on this matter, did not consider our contractual obligations in the budgeting, and that's a pretty egregious mistake. So I'm feeling less charitable to those individuals who they know who they are.
Oh, and I would just say, we have our job to do, right? We have the budget that we liked. It is what it is. And so it's just, we could do a therapy session afterwards, but in terms of what our job is, we have to come up with a set of choices, deliberate where the trade-offs are. And I think right now, what you all need is just, and I should actually, now that I think we've all said our 2 cents, if any of your team has questions for us things that you want us to clarify before we have this 2 to 3 week period where we kind of assemble the different set of ideas.
Cody,
Anything?
we have a meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, but nothing's going to happen. The meeting tomorrow is going to be a repeat of this. It's not like, speaking of theatrics.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm trying not to be theatrical here. I mean, I have a kid calling me right now. So I mean,
Understand.
like, this is really impacting people. Okay. And, I think I don't have any ideas. I don't think we can ask Dr. Jones and men to come up with ideas because they worked hard to give us a budget. I think it's now on the board, honestly, to suggest things that are not, I guess, mandated, right?
So-
And that's everything but what? Special education? I mean,
well, no, there's a lot, and
Like-
there's a lot of general ed curriculum requirements. too.
okay,
Yeah.
exactly. So ideas, I mean, that's
Yeah,
kind of where we're
no,
at.
so I was going to go there. I think it's both. I think we have to I think we have to confront the brutal facts, and I think that means the true experts in the room, to your Laura, to your point, are Dr. Jones and the team, and I think we need to put everything out there. I said that in December, so we really understand what these things look like and different options. That said, we're both right. You're both right, because it's up for all of us too. And I know we're having those conversations, and all of us have some certain ideas. There are certain ideas that probably aren't are probably best for private conversations at this point. But there are
Can't
others.
do that. We have to do everything in public.
No, there are certain, I'm not going to talk about individual jobs at this meeting. I can say to Dr. Jones, I think all of us have to talk to Dr. Jones privately, say, hey, what about this line? What about this line? What's going on there if you're saying that? Because here's why. Because I don't want people, because I don't have all the answers. And I think we have to be very careful, to everybody's point, what we're saying in public. And I can't say, it would be unresponsible right now for me to say, What about these coaching positions, right? They, because, which I'm not advocating, because if I'm in one of these coaching positions tomorrow, I'm going to go out, look at the one ads and see what's out there. And I think that's why we have to be very responsible what we're saying in public meetings, because I don't think we want to do untold damage, because there are a lot of people concerned and whatnot. Because I have that conversation in private about this position on that position, and Dr. Jones says, well, actually, because I'm not the expert, and Dr. Jones says, well, actually, we can't do that because this line actually means this, this, and that. But meanwhile, that line's out there. So I think we have to balance that. I do think we have to prioritize, I do think, we have to, low hanging fruit. I think, consultants that are not those people that were going out and evaluating kids, like you mentioned, Dr. White, I think that's got to be towards the top of the list, probably. I do think we do have some open positions, including at cabinet. I think that's, got to be at the top of the list for consideration. I do think we have to look carefully about a freeze on all travel. I think we have to look at PD being more in-house. I think there were probably some other inefficiencies of that matter that we can look into. So yes, there's absolutely those ideas, but I think some of those things we have to, at this point, we have to be very mindful of what we're saying.
Well, I just gave you those ideas, but for somebody who was, deeply involved in the strategic plan and moving this district forward, we're now faced with a situation where, because of our funding, it makes implementing all the benefits to our students a very cloudy prospect. And am I willing to part with, library books, and PD? Sure, to save jobs, to save the teachers in front of our kids. But I think we have to be pretty realistic at, what we're looking at here. And I'm gonna tell you, it looks pretty bleak, because those line items are not gonna get us to 4 million. We can't cut our way there. If we're going to look at start times, that'll get us halfway, but not all the way. And it's pretty, it's pretty scary.
No, I just appreciate that you started to put out ideas, is what I was going to say. So
Yeah, I
thank you.
was trying to get there. We were starting big picture and then getting ideas. So I was going there.
Yeah, and I'm anti-ideas in public, which I know everyone will have an issue with. I saw a line the other day that I liked that was, if the Constitutional Convention was done in public, we wouldn't have ended up with the Constitution. But I do have a lot of faith and confidence in Tony and Ben and Patrick and others to at least come up with ideas. It doesn't mean that they're coming forward and saying, this is what I would do if I was in charge of this. It just says, now that I have new constraints, and you may think that they may think that it's suboptimal, but they can at least are extremely more than competent enough to put forward where they think the marginal changes need to be, even if they don't agree with them at an absolute level. And so I think I'm very comfortable relying on that, and then taking that set of recommended changes based on their closeness to the subject matter, and then having the board deliberate about them at the margin versus trying to, take broader swings where we're, probably less not as well positioned as they are to come up with the areas to focus on. Again, recognizing that it's not what their optimal choice is.
Again, I think we might need legal advice. I am not sure we're allowed to do any of that behind closed doors. So I caution you about that.
Well,
No,
the list has to be public eventually.
Yes, but really all of our conversations have to be as well.
At
Yeah,
the
but-
committee.
Yes, but I'm not going to do that. First of all, we've done this already.
Yeah,
I
I
am
know.
not going to ask Dr. Jones. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. You either have to cut teachers. I mean, this is a $4.5 million hole. So, and you're only going to get halfway there with start time. So everything's on the table, guys, and I'm not sure we can ask them to do this exercise. I mean, maybe the Republican members of the BET have ideas, because they were the ones that came up with this. So perhaps we should ask them for their thoughts.
Again, I I think it's helpful and constructive if we
Ideas.
minimize the commentary. I think it is, uh, I think that the team is more than competent enough to come up with incremental changes that, again, they don't have to agree with in their optimal state of the world, but where they would say they think we should focus. I think that's definitely part of the job description. I have no reason to think that they're not up to that task.
Well, since it came up, that our deputy superintendent has retired and she didn't work for free. She had a salary. But we don't have a deputy right now. And God forbid, Tony had to go on a medical leave. Yeah. Who would we have to step in? We have no deputy superintendent now. I mean, I think we have to think about practically,
Are you volunteering, Laura?
oh God, if I had to hear about snow days and everybody's complaints about when to call it, no, I'm not volunteering. So I do think we have some practical considerations, but just because we've had one cabinet member retire, it's still not gonna get us there. And I do think we need to replace them. Yes.
Tony, is there any, or the team, is there any other guidance or questions you have for us that would be helpful for what you're going to be doing over the next 2 or 3 weeks?
I think most of us are gone next week. So just be clear, you won't get a lot of emails from me. But the week after, I think we'll start, again, we've been working on this. That's why Ben could articulate so well about start time. So we go through this exercise, and I think that's what makes it so difficult. And I knew right out of the gate, I could say it's going to have impacts, because we would have brought you a budget that was $4 million less if we could have. We didn't. And there's a reason why we didn't. And what it was being proposed now, well, I guess what we're living in, doesn't even cover contractual cost. So it is a challenge. We will get through the exercise, but I do think we have to be very mindful that we are not having meetings offline, because that's the last thing we want.
I wasn't.
I know, I'm
planning to
not-
Suggest that. Yeah.
But what I was asked, though, and I want to be really clear, was could we do an executive session to talk about this? And so I knew the answer, but I looked at the law book to make sure it's very, very clear. And really, the intent was not to hide or not have public conversation. The intent was, I think, exactly where you were going, that it's very difficult to talk about jobs when you have people that are in them, and it is very emotional. And the last thing I want is, causing somebody to have a breakdown because they think they're not going to have a job. And maybe that person is a single parent, and maybe they need the health insurance that's here. And maybe they're in a position that is not easy to go to another district and find. So I think we need to be very, very thoughtful about it. And certainly Ben and I will get to work with our whole team, and we've done the menu. I don't know if you remember, Kathleen, first or second year, where you kind of have these choices and stuff, but there's not a lot of great choices.
Can I ask just one more thing? The timing is I'm sorry, Cody, I think you said at the beginning, but with the RTM, or is it the BET, who do we have to be concerned about in terms of timing?
It's shorter. What, you talk about it?
When we were looking it up today, it's the date in April. Ben, was it actually, is it the 18th? I've got it written down. Can you bring it up, Ben? Because we looked it up today because somebody asked us about it.
Is it when
It's the submission date where, like, the
18th.
BET submits. Is that what you mean?
I think that's, yeah.
Oh, for the RTM call?
And then the BET has it first, right? Don't they have to, it goes back to them, no?
No, it's
It's
going
just
to the
a-
RTM.
And
And
that has to
that's
make a
next
call.
Thursday is when it's submitted next Thursday. And then
Mhm.
the RTM will act on, I believe it's May 5th. So that's the process for us. We have to work quickly because of teacher contracts and administrative contracts. That's what's really important.
Say more about that.
Well, I mean, if a teacher doesn't have a contract and you're getting into May or June, we could have a mass exodus. And this is not the climate. This is just not the climate where we want that to happen. And, you lose a physics teacher, even hiring another physics teacher in the summer. And if you're kind of, your seniority is down towards the bottom, they're very nervous, they're very scared, and they have no idea what we're talking about tonight as far as where we're looking. So we have to get people contracts so that they feel secure, because another district will be very happy to put them under contract very quickly.
And just to not induce mass panic, I think that's the reason that we want to accelerate the timeline that we're doing this on. So it's not a done by July 1st, but done kind of in April, right?
Can I ask one more question? Because since school start time, again, not saying I'm for it or against it, but since so many people have come to me with it, I do think we have to look at, like, we were the leaders on that at the
Mhm.
time. I suspect other districts followed, and all that's going to have a waterfall effect, again, with sports and all those other things. So can we look at which other districts and is it FCAC made the changes? Because I imagine we're gonna have to realign all of our game times and everything like that. And I don't know if they adjusted for us, if we adjusted for them, what happened there, but I suspect that's going to have an impact on that decision.
I can certainly pull that information. I do know some of my colleagues, the reason they didn't go to 8:30 was the expense, but a lot of the districts around us are much smaller. So they don't have the complexities that we do, but I can certainly find out.
Just very quickly, I just want to say that RTM will take action May 12th. That's the budget day. May 12th is when they will formally adopt the budget. And just a reminder that they cannot add to the budget, they can only reduce.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We can. Oh, yeah. Motion to adjourn. Kathleen seconds. All in favor? Great. Thank you.
you.
Right.